All right, so I wanted to kind of get into the backbone of Blueprint elements and just talking about classes in this video. So I'm going to right click in my BP here folder. And we've actually created a class before. We've created a class of type actor. And if we right click here and we go to Blueprint class, you can see here, when we open it, we have these different types. We have the actor, which we're somewhat familiar with. This is an object that can be placed and spawned in the world. And then a pawn is an actor. So you can see pawn is derived from actor that can be possessed and receive input from a controller. And a character is a type of pawn. So this is characters derived from pawn that includes the ability to walk around. So they just keep building on each other, but they all derive from this actor class. And if you go down here to all classes, you can see there's all these different types of classes. And if we go to a couple things, like I select, for example, this piece here, and I right click on it, we can open actor and reference, we can place an actor, things like that. So you could edit this cube itself too. Remember, this is just a cube, but they're also talking about it as an actor. So if I click on open actor in viewer, you can see it has these different components or parts of it, right? Um, let's see here. Something else we can do is up at the top here, if we click on our list of world blueprints available option, it says we have this thing where it says convert selection to blueprint class. And you can actually create this, take this object here, which has all these things, and turn it into a actor class. So if we, if I go to the highest level, which is object here, and I go down, it's asking me, what do I want to use? Well, I want to create a blueprint out of this status mag. And if I hit select on that, I went ahead and created one called Cube 6, blueprint. And now we've created a class or blueprint class out of that little cube that we have in our scene. Now, I want to get into, if we go into our BP fun that we created earlier, remember we dragged BP fun into our level. It's right here. What we can do is we have this section here of components. So if I hit add here and I say, well, I want to add a cube, right? And if I go to my viewport here, you can see it added a cube. And if I compile and save that and I go back in here, now you can see there's a cube added to my BP fun. So there's these different components that can be added inside of a class. So for example, another thing could be a static mesh. So if I do SM, or we just type static, and let me delete this cube for a second actually, and I go to where it's a static mesh type and I click on that, there's a bunch of models that are already in here that are from, like either we downloaded them or whatever. So if I hit F, kind of focus in on this, um, let's see, there is our angel model, but it's so far off. I don't know why the pivot point is so crazy off in there. I'll just pick something else. Let's do I think the character here. What is this? Let's try that and then hit F and to focus on it. There we go. So we have this little target base guy who's here. If I compile and save that, you can see that character appears in the scene. So you could think of them, if you're coming from Unity, as sort of a blueprint class is a prefab, and within it you can add a bunch of different components. Let's talk a little bit about what a game mode is before we create one in Engine. So in the Unreal Engine, a game mode is the class that defines the rules of the game for a level. So if we're going to break this down a little bit deeper, you can think of it as a referee. It decides how the game starts, what the player controls, what counts as a winning or losing scenario, and what happens when something important occurs, like a death or scoring. But what the game mode actually controls is essentially a set of default classes and core rules. So for example, default pawn, which you can see here, is what the player controls. And then we have the player controller class, and then we have a HUD, which is the heads-up display in the game. And then we have the game state class. And then there's like rules. For example, win condition, spawn behavior, and then restart the logic of the level. Now, if your game was, like if we use the analogy of a sport, the game mode could essentially be considered the rule book and the referee. And then the player controller is essentially the player's brain. And then the pawn controller is the player's body. All right, so let's go ahead and create a game mode back in Unreal here. So right click inside of your BP folder or your blueprints folder and just go to blueprint class. You'll notice that one of the classes here, it says game mode base. And as we talked about a few moments ago, A game mode base defines the games being played, its rules, scoring, and other phases of the game type. So they even explicitly write it in the description here. So what I normally do, because it is a blueprint class, is I'll usually click on game mode here and I'll type BP and then whatever the game mode is for that level. So if you're going to be making games with me later, this is a great way. You're going to see us later. We're going to create different game modes for different games. Now if I double click this game mode, you're going to see by default that it has some cool things that are under this classes section. It has a game session class, a game state class, player controller class, all the stuff that we talked about before. Here's our HUD class and all that other good stuff. So how do we add this, the essentially our BP game mode here that we created into our scene so it becomes our primary game mode? Because right now you could see here's our details panel, our world settings panel, and again, if you not sure how to get to that, you can go to view here. Let's click back in here. Let's see. Sorry, window here, and then go to world settings, and that'll turn on your world settings panel. And inside of here, we already have a game mode that's called BP third person game mode. And if I press play and I scroll through here, you'll see that at the bottom, the yellow, these are things that are loaded in at playtime. We have a BP third person game mode. That's this game mode being launched in. So inside the world settings, if I go inside here and I grab my BP game mode and I just drop it in there and I press play, you're going to notice something that's going to happen. First, there is no longer a character. We don't have that in there. And let me go ahead and just hit F8 for a second. And if we scroll down, we're losing some of those other yellow properties in here. But we're getting BP game mode in here. So how do we add our character, the default third-person character, into our level? So, so what we can do is down here, I'm going to select this advanced option. And here, let's see. Under our world settings, BP game mode, selected game mode rather, you'll see default pawn class. I'm going to go ahead and click on that. I'm going to select BP third person character. Now when I press play, you can see it'll load in the BP third person character using my game mode. So I think that's a good place to stop. I know we haven't gone through all this other stuff, but when we go to building full-length games, we're going to touch on each one of these when we create our own custom HUDs and so forth. Right now, I just want to give you a really quick overview of Blueprint classes and how they work.